Hello, everyone. Dr. Anthony Criniti IV here, also known as Dr. Finance, and you're on the Dr. Finance Live podcast today. We have an amazing, incredible, super amazing guest, Jim Cathcart. He is actually an unbelievable speaker. He's a Hall of Fame professional speaker, folks, 40 plus years. He's got so many accolades. I'll just have him tell it. So let's give Jim a warm welcome. Welcome, Jim. How are you, sir?
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you. This is fun. Looking forward to it today.
Yeah, absolutely. And a pleasure to have you here, Jim. We had Jim on our Clubhouse stage a few weeks ago, and he actually just turned the party out. Was completely had people completely in awe for hours. It was amazing. So, Jim, let's get started with a quick overview. Can you just explain, what maybe a summary of your accolades, and then we'll get into the story of yourself as well after.
I've been a professional speaker and author for 45 years, and I've written 21 books. I've delivered 3,300 speeches for pay around the world. Been in all 50 states, every province of Canada except the Yukon, much of the rest of the world. For the last 5 years, I've been touring China until the COVID hit in 2020 and everything shut down. But I went 2015 through 2019, many trips to mainland China on lecture tours. Ended up going to 23 major cities and speaking to tens of thousands of people. And most days I was in front of a couple of thousand people speaking through a translator for 4 to 6 hours. And did Yangtze River cruises, teaching on board. Just wow, what an experience that was. And translated 4 of my books into Chinese, which is weird to look at. And I've got a video series over there of 110 short video lessons that are me speaking in English, but with Chinese subtitles, which is kind of cool. And I've been president of the National Speakers Association. I've been honored to receive every major award given to professional speakers in the world, as far as I know. I've received the Golden Gavel Award from Toastmasters International. They give it to non-Toastmasters. They've given it to Walter Cronkite and Art Linkletter and Tony Robbins, Zig Ziglar, Nito Cobain, Jeannie Robertson, famous people, all over the world, Ken Blanchard. I got the Cavett Award, which is the Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Speakers Association. I was inducted into the Sales and Marketing Hall of Fame in London for the work I've done to champion the cause of what I call relationship selling, making relationships an asset and treating them as an asset, managing accordingly. What I'm best known for, I think, is the Acorn Principle. It's one of my books that became an international bestseller. And the whole idea of that, it's based on about 9 years of psychological research, but it's a self-guided tour of what makes you who you are. And so it looks into the nature of your intellect and the structure of it and how it functions, the value system that motivates you and causes you to want or not want something, your personal velocity, which is the patterns in your energy and drive, your behavioral style, your background imprint, the influence of your primary relationships in your life on you. And I mean, it's really in-depth stuff, but it's written for the layman. It's written for the everyday person. And then I wrote a book for my grandkids a couple of years ago, and I wrote it in 1 minute messages, and I called it the Self-Motivation Handbook. And it has 336 1-minute lessons on every aspect of life. And the publisher sold out to another publisher, and they said, let's re-release it with some new edits and change the title. So they changed the title to The Power Minute, because each of the lessons is 1 minute. And it came out in March or April of 2020. So that was my next to most recent. And then my most recent book is Intelligent Curiosity, which I co-authored with Lisa Patrick out of Canada. Lisa had been a private investigator. And so we wrote Intelligent Curiosity to teach people what to wonder about and how to explore it. So other than that, I've only been playing guitar and singing in nightclubs, riding my motorcycle, and running mountain trails.
Yeah, Jim, and we're going to get into your books in a little bit. I want to get to know you a little bit better. Maybe in a few minutes, can you tell us your story about how your journeys to get where you are? Because you came from humble backgrounds, and to me, that I think that's extremely fascinating. And your typical entrepreneur is probably watching this. They're out there struggling every day, so they want to know about how first of all that it's possible, which you're proving, and that second, how that road can look like to get where you're coming from.
Absolutely. I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and my dad was a telephone repairman. Mom was a housewife taking care of me and my sister and my invalid grandfather, who had had a stroke in his 60s. And for the last 7 years of his life, he was in a hospital bed in our front bedroom, didn't speak or move from the bed for 7 years. And I thought that was normal. You know, it didn't seem extraordinary to me, but certainly was a burden on my mom. And Dad was on the road all the time as a telephone lineman, and then later as a repairman. He was around more often. But I grew up expecting to be ordinary. And so I was. In school, I was a good student in the courses I liked, and a not good student in the ones I didn't. And so I graduated 176th out of 430 at Hall High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1964. And I'll save people the math. I'm 75 today. Actually, I was 75 yesterday, September 29th. So I grew up expecting an ordinary life. I figured I'd go to work at some place like the phone company and work maybe in an office instead of being on the road and driving a truck and, you know, climbing poles. And at 65, I'd retire, and at whatever the statistical number was for my gene pool, I would die, get out of the way, let somebody else have the spotlight. Because I figured my life didn't matter that much. You know, it mattered to my parents, but even though I was in a loving family, I was not in a family that encouraged greatness out of me. And I didn't associate with a group of people that made me think anything was possible. So age 23, when I got married, I was 50 pounds overweight. I was smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, never exercised, had never been an athlete, had never been a scholar. I had had dozens of jobs. I worked, you know, for a year at a bank, worked unloading trucks and boxcars, drove a truck for a while. I even had a job selling donuts door to door in the neighborhood when I was younger. And I ended up at the Housing Authority, Urban Renewal Agency, as a clerk. And I was an assistant to a man named Bob Moore, and Bob didn't need an assistant. So I was bored to tears, making $525 a month, newly married, new baby at home, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up. And one day in the next room, I heard the radio playing, and Earl Nightingale, the dean of personal motivation, was on the air that day. Had a little 5-minute show called Our Changing World. What an apt title. And I heard him that day, and what he said was literally in 1972, this is what he said. He said, if you will spend 1 extra hour every day studying the field you've chosen, you will be a national expert in that field in 5 years or less. That hit me like a ton of bricks. I thought, wait a minute. The math actually works. An hour a day, let's say 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. 5 years, that's 1,250 hours. If I studied anything for 1,250 hours, I would know a lot about it. Maybe even be a leading authority on that subject. Wow. Well, what do I want to be an expert on? I didn't know. I had 3 years college. I'd majored in business administration because I knew no better. You know, I didn't know what I wanted to focus on. So why not just get a generic degree, right? Didn't get the degree, dropped out. So I'm sitting there thinking, what do I want to spend an hour a day on extra? I don't know. And then a couple of weeks later, it hit me. And I said, you know what? I want to do what he does. I want to be Dr. Finance. I want to be like Anthony. I want to be like Earl Nightingale. That was my idea, but I didn't know what that meant. And I'd never given a speech, and and I had nothing to say. So that kind of figured. But somehow what he was doing felt absolutely right to me. And I said, okay, he's in the field of self-improvement, personal growth. That's what I'm going to do. And I wrote it down. I wrote it down in August of that year. And I said, by September 1st, 1979, I will be a national authority in the field of personal growth. And I wrote that down during a seminar that was called Adventures in Attitudes, led by a guy named Gib Strammel, who I've never seen since, back in 1970, whatever, and in Little Rock. So I wrote that down, national expert, September 1, 1979. Well, I started getting all the classic books, and I got Think and Grow Rich, of course, the classic book on self-help. That, by the way, is a first edition.
Wow.
A friend of mine said that thing's probably worth $2,500. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. The Power of Positive Thinking by Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz. Later, I met and got this copy of the book from Zig Ziglar, See You at the Top. Original title of that book was Biscuits, Fleas, and Pump Handles. I read The Science of Getting Rich, I'm Okay, You're Okay by Thomas Harris, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, that's my
all
favorite.
Classic books in the world of self-motivation or self-improvement. And of course, my world started changing. And I joined the JCs, the Junior Chamber of Commerce, and got hyper active. Now, what does that mean? That means, now I had a day job and I had a wife and son at home. The son was a little bitty guy. And so I'd come home every evening and have dinner with them, and then I'd go to a JC's meeting. In the years 1973 and 74, I went to 400 JC's meetings for free after work and on weekends. 400 in 2 years. And the reason I went was the purpose of JC's, unlike Kiwanis or Lions or Rotary, is not community service. The purpose of JC's is leadership training, and community service is how they do it. So you plan your project, you go serve the community, you come back, you evaluate your project, and then you teach the other members what you learned from it. And that became the growth process for each chapter. And there were 350,000 members at that time. So I quickly went from a brand new member to the guy in charge of the leadership training discussions, to the state chairman in charge of those for 280 chapters, to the chapter president, and then was hired by the national headquarters. And I was selling Earl Nightingale's audio cassettes door to door in Little Rock just prior to that. Wow. What a transformation of my life. And I lost 50 pounds and stopped smoking.
Wow. And how long? Would you say 1 year?
Well, the losing weight took place in 6 months in 1975, 76. And the stop smoking was January 25th, 1974, but who's counting? And I will never smoke again, ever. And I didn't try to quit. I quit. And I went through 3 months of misery physically for the withdrawal, but I got it over with.
You got a lifetime of pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah.
3 months of misery, right?
Yep. And I never tried to quit. I just quit. I gave away the engraved lighters that I'd gotten even from my mom. She gave me one with my name on it. And I gave that away to a stranger I didn't know because I knew it wouldn't come back to me. Because if you give it to a friend, they'll say, oh, well, hey, I see that you've started smoking again. You want your lighter back? So I gave everything away, including ashtrays, and told my friends ours is a non-smoking home. And this was at a time when that was a rude thing to do because everybody smoked.
Thank you, Jim. Your story is absolutely incredible, and I'll tell you, I could listen to it again and again, because you're actually like a perfect role model example of what it takes to transform your mindset, and if you're determined, if you're motivated to do it instantly. I mean, you must have turned that switch on immediately and said, from this point on, that's it, and just kept going, because that's an incredible amount of accomplishments in a quick amount of time.
Yeah,
You were ready.
I became a true textbook, dictionary definition fanatic about personal development. That's all I wanted to think about, be around, or talk about. And my circle of friends quickly changed, because most of my friends said, whoa, what's happened to Mr. Motivation over here? And they didn't want to hang out with me. I was too intense. But the people that were into this, man, I found my tribe. And we're fueling each other's growth, and they'd say, hey, have you read this one? No, tell me about that, and hey, what are your goals? And you're going to love this. I'm talking hard evidence here. Okay. I did this for the discussion I was leading last night. I went back in my files and I found my original, what I called my thought diet card from the 1970s, where on one side of the card, it says my current primary goal. And then it says the 5 traits I am developing in order to achieve that goal. And then on the flip side, it has 10 qualities that I want to cultivate in me. And you can see that it says, speak well of all, be patient and tolerant, be modest, generous, helpful, inspiring, observant, self-disciplined, totally honest, exhibit my faith in God, be healthy, fit, and agile. And here's a picture of my wife in those days. She's still my wife, but this was her picture when we got married. And I carried that with me every day. And then I wrote all that down on individual cards with an elaborated definition of each one of those lines. So I took, when I worked at the JC's, my business card, and cut it up and put a definition of the quality that I wanted to cultivate on the back of the card. Cheerful, be always optimistic, and conscious of the positive circumstances, and things like that. So I would take one of these at a time and put it on my bathroom mirror and keep it there for a week or so until I had pretty much mastered it, kind of like Ben Franklin did back in the day. And then later I typed it and put it up, you can see it's very weathered, but put it up there that way. And I had a summary card that had all the details on it. This is from 1976. Wow. Many of our listeners today didn't exist in 1976. Many of them didn't exist in 1986. Think about that. Some of them weren't around in 96 or even 2000 at the turn of the century. In 2010, I came up with a statement of passion and purpose that shows that what my life purpose is. It summarizes all that other into one quick statement. It says that I believe the reason I was born, the reason I exist, is to allow life to express itself through me, to fulfill more of itself through me. I believe all forms of life are a portal through which the life impulse can come, through which God expresses himself, so to speak. And here's what I put as my mantra, so to speak. Through intelligent observation, vocal appreciation, in other words, speaking up for what I see and appreciate, and full self-expression in all parts of my life, I inspire myself and others to live more courageously, more intelligently, and more joyfully, so that all of us will, as it says in the Bible, have life and have it more abundantly. So I feel very purpose-driven. I feel I've got an opportunity and an obligation to live as fully and as well and as honorably as I can to set an example for others. And so that's what I'm striving to do.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. We're going to pivot for a second and start talking about your books before we get started. So we got about 20 something questions or so. Basically, I want to capture all the questions, mostly from the night in Clubhouse, and have it for recording for everybody.
Okay.
So before we talk about your books, I just want to say I also observed one other cool thing about you. This is on a side note. I heard you say that you like to drive bikes, and you have driven around the world to the craziest places on a motorcycle, like the Alps, et cetera. Is that true?
I've ridden about 150,000 miles on a motorcycle, and
Wow.
I've had 18 different bikes over the years. My current bike is a Triumph Bonneville 1200 cc 2018 model. And my wife, she said to me on our 20th anniversary, she said, our 25th is coming up. I said, no, it's not. It's 5 years away. She said, yeah, but you need to start saving. I said, really? Tell me about that. She said, well, that's our diamond anniversary. I said, no, 25th is silver. She said, no, it's our diamond anniversary. I said, oh, okay, what kind of diamond do you want? She said, because she just had a band, for wedding band, she didn't have a diamond. And she told me what kind of ring she wanted. And I said, okay. And I started saving. And sure enough, 5 years later, she went and picked out the ring and had it designed to her specs. And she happily wears it to this day. Well, when she saw that she was going to get the ring, she said, what do you want for our 25th? I said, I want you on the back seat of a motorcycle as we tour the Alps for 16 days. Because there's an organized tour, 16-day tour that goes through 6 countries. Germany, France, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, and so forth, and Liechtenstein. Anyway, she said, okay. And we went, and oh my gosh, we're riding through ice and snow up in the mountain peaks, mountain passes, and cobblestone streets through the villages and by the lakes. And we're riding along one road in, I think it was Switzerland. And I looked out and saw a big field of grain, wheat probably, that had been cut, and it was all laying flat. And I stopped the bike, got off, took off my helmet, climbed the fence, and ran out there and did snow angels in the wheat. And she took a picture of it, and then I got back on the bike and we kept on riding. And we've ridden Canada, New England during the changing of the colors, the Rocky Mountains, virtually every inch of California. I've just ridden all over creation, and I love, love, love motorcycling. I'm a life member of the American Motorcyclist Association.
And you're a travel fanatic too, right? Like, you've literally been around the world in so many countries, right?
Yeah, I've only ridden motorcycles in a few, but I've been all around the world. I've been around the world on speaking tours 4 times, I think. Wow. And I've done 10 trips to Australia, many, many trips to China, as I mentioned, 23 major cities in China. Man,
we should probably do a Clubhouse night just on how to travel the world.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Yep.
That would be a really cool
South America. I've done, I went to Caracas, Venezuela, under the leadership of, during the time of leadership of Hugo Chavez.
What year was that, Jim? Because I was there in 98.
2006 or something.
Okay.
And I've never been so glad to leave a place in my life. What a beautiful country with a horrible leadership regime. And everything was corrupt. Everything was, all the homes, every building had barbed wire, concertina, and broken glass on the tops of the walls. And all the people were afraid, and you had to be careful what you did. I got in a Mercedes at the airport, the car that was driving me to the hotel. And we got into heavy traffic, and he literally shoved the other cars out of the way with the Mercedes, like bumper cars.
What?
And of course, it ruined the car.
Yeah.
But this was common for him. And we drove on a couple of sidewalks to get around traffic jams. And that was their idea of normal. And even the customs agents at the airport tried to get me to give up all my American money and take Bolivares instead.
Wow. That's something else.
There are some scary places to be out there.
All right. Thank you, Jim. All right. So yeah, we're going to have some fun now. We're going to talk about, just to give you some general ideas where we're going. We're going to talk about the book. Purpose is coming back. We're going to talk about your speaking and, of course, tying all into finance. So let's start with the book. Maybe in a minute or two, can you summarize this new book with Lisa Patrick? And I know you got your bookshelf there, so that's awesome. If you want to do a little show and tell too, feel free.
Thank you. Well, the latest book, which came out September 21 of 21, is coincidentally my 21st book. Ding! And it's with Lisa Patrick out of Canada, who's formerly a private investigator, and she's a brand consultant and a speaker and just a bundle of energy. And we wrote the book Intelligent Curiosity to teach people how to be curious in a smart way. You know, what do you wonder about? Everybody's curious, but how do you know what to focus on and how do you explore it? You know, how do you know that the information you're getting is not indoctrination instead of just information? Because if all you watch is one channel of TV for news, you're being indoctrinated. Mm-hmm. If you watch multiple channels, then you're getting varied points of view. If the only channels you watch are mainstream, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, then you're being indoctrinated. You need broader input. You need to listen to people you don't agree with. You need to hear from people who don't think like you do, people who you think are wrong. You need to learn how to listen to them objectively instead of just listening to judge them. And there's not much of that being taught. Critical thinking is not encouraged like it used to be, and it's desperately needed today. So that's what that book's about. I wrote the book Relationship Selling, which became an international bestseller. And relationship selling is about how to become more skilled at every step in the sales cycle. There are 8 stages in a sales cycle: preparation, targeting the right people, connecting with those people, assessing their needs, solving their problem, getting their commitment to buy, assuring that they're satisfied, or confirming the sale, assuring that they're satisfied, and then managing yourself and managing sales. So this focuses on all 8 of those competencies and teaches that. And I've got, courses and videos and all kinds of things on top of this. And the Acorn Principle is the result of 9 years of psychological research I did with a team of people at Arizona State University, a bunch of PhDs in the psychological testing service.
That's a New York Times bestseller, I think, too, right, Jim?
Not New York Times, but yeah, it's been bestseller list in many, many categories around the world. Okay. And it was the #2 best-selling ebook in the world in the year 2000.
Wow.
Out of 2,000 ebooks.
Yeah, it's
Stephen
really
King
famous.
was #1. This was #2. Robert Ludlum's Hades Factor was #3. Tom Peters had #4, and then 2,000 other titles after that in ebook. And this one has done really, really well. So is this one. And then I've got others. The Power Minute came out in 2020, and more to come, more in the pipeline. I'm writing one right now called High Rev, and how to live a high rev life, high revenue and high rev. So that's good. That's with Dennis Madden, colleague of mine. And I'll leave that.
You have 21 books total, you said, Jim. Do you have collaboration books as well?
Yeah, I've co-authored a number of them, but many of those are just solo authored, like Relationship Selling, the Acorn Principle.
Okay.
It's interesting when I go back and I look at the first edition of Relationship Selling. This is when it came out in paperback, second edition, but the same content. Cover endorsement, Zig Ziglar.
Wow, that's awesome.
On the back, Og Mandino.
Wow.
The greatest salesman in the world.
That's awesome.
And worked for W. Clement Stone, who I also knew. And Clement Stone was the personal manager of Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. So this all goes back, to Andrew Carnegie and even before him. Other people on the cover of my book, Spencer Johnson, who wrote Who Moved My Cheese, who was a friend of mine, it lived in La Jolla, San Diego, and Kenneth Blanchard. And they were the endorsers of that one. The Acorn Principle, endorsed by, the foreword by Dennis Waitley.
Wow.
Endorsed by Jack Canfield, Tony Alessander, my former business partner and best friend. Gosh, on and on and on. Just, Brian Tracey, James Brown, the Fox Sports guy, Nito Kubain, Les Brown, Daniel Burris.
So Jim, 21 books total. That includes your co-authored books, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But your main authored books were the ones that you showed just now, mostly.
Right.
Okay.
Look at co-authored books. I want to show you in the Power Minute. I've got this enumerated. Other works by Jim Cathcart.
Oh, cool.
So there's a lot.
Yeah.
Going back to 1976.
Jeez.
First book I ever wrote was called Communication Dynamics.
And we're going to talk about your Acorn Principle in a little bit, because I actually I really like the message of that. So that'll be 2 questions from now.
Okay.
So Jim, I want to step back for a second. By the way, Lisa Patrick will be on the podcast in a few weeks, and I just thought of it. Probably want to bring her to Clubhouse and talk about. Well, she's got a club over there called Network Like Crazy. So we can tie that concept into this new book. I didn't know that was what your new book was about, because it's a really good message. So I think that could be another really good talk as well. All right.
Yeah,
So
her topic is edge learning. Don't just look at the center of the target, look at the target itself and where the target is and the surroundings and beyond the target. Like if you're at a shooting range, you don't want to just look at the target. You want to know when the bullet goes through this, what's it going to hit?
right. Got to be aware.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Jim. So as a former president of the National Speakers Association, can you tell us the significance of that role and more about the organization itself? Maybe a minute.
Sure. Well, Cabot Robert, the man in this statue over here, is the founder of NSA. And Cabot, many years ago, this is his typical speaking pose. Many years ago, when Cabot was speaking, he found that there weren't many professional speakers. Most conventions used politicians and preachers and industry people, and that's it. And there weren't many people that were really skilled speakers. And so the few that were good, they got referrals from one to another all over the country, and they were busy, busy, busy. Like Dr. Kenneth McFarland back in the 50s and 60s, was flying every day to another meeting, sometimes 2 meetings in 2 different cities, and giving speeches. And Cabot got into that world, and he said, we should get together and collaborate and share leads and help each other get better as speakers. And so he formed what was called the Phoenix Summer Sales Seminar, which was a symposium where he'd get together all his fellow speakers, which were only a handful of people at the time. And he'd promote it to a local audience in the city he lived in, Phoenix, Arizona. And people would come out and they'd hear all these speakers and make notes of how to contact them and hire them for their own conventions. And so that was pretty cool. And then one day, a couple of years into that, they said, we ought to form an association of speakers. What do we call it? I don't know. Call it the National Speakers Association. The others laughed. Ha ha, national. Ha. Yeah, right. And so Cabot said, no, we're going to do this. And they all dug in their pockets to see what loose change they had. And they contributed that to help get it started. And Cabot's secretary, associate Merlin Cundiff, agreed to be sort of the organizer of it. And they formed it in 1973, 74. And in 1976, I heard about it when I was on the national headquarters staff of the Junior Chamber of Commerce, the JCs. and in charge of leadership training programs. And I joined 1976. They had about 200 members. Well, we grew that organization into what it is today, which is close to 4,000 members and maybe more like 6 when you look at the international that we spawned, because we formed an international collaboration, which resulted in the creation of a chapter in England called Professional Speakers Association, and one in Australia and one in Canada. And then that led to one in Malaysia and one in Germany and South Africa. You know, now they're all over the world. And it's called the Global Speakers Federation. And it's pretty sophisticated. Well, NSA itself has a foundation now that we started with contributing one speech fee that's now millions of dollars. And they give out scholarships and they give relief to speakers who are in financial crisis. And it's just amazing. You know, there's like 36 chapters around the country and all these members. And I served as president in 1988 and 89. And I created the program we call the professional competencies to be the professional education program to get you certified to be a certified speaking professional.
Wow, that is incredible. And you played such a significant role in that organization, Jim. So I appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to move on to your Acorn book. We're going to bounce back a little bit.
Okay.
So the question I have for you is, what is more important, the acorn or the oak tree?
Acorn. And you got to have a squirrel if you got an acorn, right? The whole reason for the Acorn Principle title came from my friend Spencer Johnson, the co-author of the 1 Minute Manager, the guy who wrote Who Moved My Cheese, among other books. He was my next door office neighbor in La Jolla, San Diego. And one day he said, hey, let's go down to the beach and watch the sunset. So we went to the La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club and we sat there and watched the sunset and had a glass of wine. And he said, so what are you working on? And I said, well, I've got a new book called Third Thoughts and it's not going anywhere. He said, why not? I said, I've got 9 years of psychological research. It's a well-written book. He said, what's the title about though? I said, well, you know how people say I'm having second thoughts, meaning I'm unsure? He said, yeah. I said, well, I thought it would be clever to write a book about third thoughts. You know, after you've been unsure, what do you call it when you have a return to clarity? Third thoughts. He said, clever, but no cigar. You're not going to go anywhere with that. I said, yeah, I've already proven that because all the publishers rejected it. I said, so I think I'll rewrite it under the title, Rethinking Yourself. He said, too ordinary. I said, well, I don't know how to title it. He said, yeah, you do. Call it the Acorn Principle. I said, why would I call it the Acorn Principle? He said, well, I've heard you tell that story about an acorn that's trying to become a redwood, which is, of course, impossible because an acorn is going to be an oak. He said, that's a great metaphor. He said, so you call your book The Acorn Principle. Know yourself to grow yourself. And I said, but people won't know what the Acorn Principle is. He said, and so they will pick up the book because it's a catchy title. I said, well, that's a good thought. So I did. I went back and rewrote it under that heading and emphasized the acorn metaphor throughout. And sure enough, St. Martin's Press picked it up, gave me a big advance and promoted it worldwide, and so did I. And they released it as a hardcover, a soft cover, and then an ebook. And as I mentioned, it hit #2 bestseller in the world as an ebook in the year 2000. And that kind of made my bones, that paid my dues and got me street credibility. And the Acorn Principle is some pretty serious insight, because it really does help you understand how you are smart, not just how smart you are, what matters to you and why it matters. So that tells you how to motivate yourself and tells me how to motivate you, what your personal velocity is, so that I know what's too much or too little for you to handle at a given time. Because if you give a person with high velocity too little, they get bored and distracted. If you give a person with low velocity too much, they get overwhelmed and they shut down. And so if you notice somebody's velocity patterns, you can give them the level of workload that's appropriate for them. And you keep them at their best instead of their most, because most will burn you out. Best you can do all day long. So it's really done well. And it's now translated into Chinese and Finnish and German and Spanish. And I mean, it's all over the world. So it's done really, really well.
Thank you, Jim. That is an awesome analogy. All right. So Jim, I want to pivot to one of your mentors. You mentioned him before, but can you maybe summarize in a minute or so, talk about the impact Earl Nightingale had on your life?
Earl Nightingale in 1972 was on 900 radio stations around the world. He had a show like yours, but shorter. It was called Our Changing World. It was 5 minutes long. And every day he would appear on the local radio stations and, throughout the country and throughout the world with his little inspirational moment of 5 minutes of wisdom. And in 1972, as I mentioned, I heard him on the radio and he said, 1 extra hour a day and study in your field. 5 years from now, you're a national expert. So I became fanatical about the study of all these things. And then I found out that Earl Nightingale had an audio library on cassettes. And the audio library was called it was called Lead the Field. And it had cassettes like this.
Wow.
In little leatherette looking cassette packs. And this particular one is from the Great Ideas series in there called What Failures Don't Do. And one of the things he talks about in there is the difference between successes and failures is both of them don't like doing the same things, but the successful people form the habit of getting those things done anyway, despite not liking to do them. Failures say, oh, no, I don't like to do that. I'm not good at that. And they walk away from it. So anyway, Nightingale, I started listening to him on cassettes. I bought a $560 audio cassette library of Earl Nightingale, which this is part of, at a time when my monthly income was $525.
Wow.
That was a huge commitment, which was not popular at home. It really wasn't, until about a month had passed and my wife said, I think you ought to keep those, because she had seen the transformation taking place in my life by listening to these motivational messages on every aspect of daily living and business, listening to them 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours a day. On weekends, I'd have those cassettes playing all day long, no matter what I was doing. And I became, like I mentioned earlier, fanatical about all this personal growth. And it rapidly changed my life. I started setting goals, losing weight, stopped smoking, doing better at work, got promoted, got raises, got new positions of authority, got included on discussions and asked to serve on committees and chair projects. And man, my life was really, really changing from being the slug I was in 72 to where finally I had the opportunity to sell Earl Nightingale's materials. I left the housing authority job and went to work selling Earl Nightingale's recordings door to door to businesses in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1974. 1975, the USJCs in Tulsa, Oklahoma said, we want you to come here and become the national program manager in charge of leadership training, individual development, they called it. 356,000 members nationwide. And I was the guy in charge of writing the training manuals and going out and promoting those around the country, speaking at JC's conventions. So, well, that was the launch of my speaking career. And 2 years later, I went out on my own. And in 1977, I was a full-time professional speaker, my primary client was Mass Mutual Life Insurance Company in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And the client, Joe Willard, general agent, gave me a corner office in the penthouse suite of a beautiful new office building in exchange for my consulting and advice. And he paid me what the JCs had been paying me, which I thought was a big salary. It was $1,500 a month, $18,000 a year. I thought I'd hit a home run. And so I started growing my speaking business while I was with Joe, and soon discontinued the salary with him, but stayed in the office as part of my compensation. And my business went from 18,000 the first year to 28,000 the second year, 32,000 the next year, 64,000, 83,000, 109,000, 172,000, and on from there.
That's incredible.
And, yeah. And
So-
then there's a quick closure to that story. When I was president of the National Speakers Association in 1989, oh no, I'm sorry. I'm leaving out an important part. In 1984, I had moved to California and formed a partnership with a college professor, Dr. Tony Alessandra. And we grew Cathcart, Alessandra and Associates very rapidly to where we had books with major publishers in New York. We had video series published by the University of Southern California. We were knocking it out of the park. And I was sitting at my desk and the phone rang. I picked it up and it was Earl Nightingale himself. He said, "May I speak to Jim Cathcart?" And I said, which means this is he. I didn't, I was speechless. He said, "Mr. Cathcart, I read an article of yours in the Nonprofit World Report on personality types, and I think that would make a good audio album. I published those." I said, "Oh, believe me, sir, I know." And I told him about him being my mentor and all this. And he said, "Well, send your recordings to me, and if we like it, we'll have you re-record it to our specifications and we'll publish it." Well, I sent it to him, and it was on personality types, the 4 basic personality types, which everybody talks about today. But back in 1983 and 4, nobody talked about that. There was Myers-Briggs type indicator. There was DISC, which was taught by a company called Performax out of Minnesota. And there was Dr. David Merrill and Wilson Learning teaching the social styles model. Well, Tony Alessandra and I went back and did all that research that they had done to see if we would reach a different conclusion. And we did, and we published Relationship Strategies through Nightingale Conant in 1984. They sold $3.5 million worth of it in the first 2 years. We went from nobodies to world fame in 2 years. And so 1972, I heard Earl Nightingale on the radio. 1974, I sold his materials as a licensee, or actually as an affiliate of a licensee. In 1984, he was selling my materials.
It's super cool.
Now, think of that.
Yeah,
How
that's
profound
awesome.
is that?
12 years.
The fat loser government clerk that heard him on the radio, 12 years later, Nightingale calls out of the blue and starts publishing his album and sells $3.5 million worth of it. And me, doesn't have a college degree.
Jim, how famous, now maybe you can help me with it. I guess it's my generation gap, but
Yeah.
how famous was Earl Nightingale back in the day? Because I see Bob Proctor work with him too. And
Yeah, Bob Proctor was one of his VPs.
yeah.
Bob Proctor and a guy named Jay Stead, Stead, and another guy named Nick Carter, and a guy that Bob Proctor was partners with, Leland Val Vanderwall out of Canada, like Bob, and Harold Gash, the man in Little Rock, Arkansas, who sold the programs to me. And Anthony Robbins studied Earl Nightingale and was a protege of Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn was a protege of Earl Nightingale. I was a protege of Earl Nightingale. Jim Rohn and I were inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame together in 1985 in Washington, D.C. Wow. 5 people inducted. Tony Alessandra, me, Jim Rohn, and two other people, Dr. Lyman Stile and another guy whose face I can see, but I've forgotten his name for the moment.
But there was nobody else doing what Earl Nightingale was doing at that time, right? On the radio and all that stuff.
He was omnipresent. They called him the Dean of Personal Motivation.
Wow.
And he knew all the big names. He knew Napoleon Hill. He knew Norman Vincent Peale. He knew Dale Carnegie. So we're talking about first generation guy. And he was our inspiration.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm the more I learn about this, it's so amazing, the lineage of all this stuff, going back, like you said, the Carnegie, and we can probably argue it goes back to even like the Roman days and beyond Egyptian.
Well,
because it's a mastermind concept,
There's Dale Carnegie, who was a latter-day guy in the 1950s. And then there was Andrew Carnegie, who was the steel giant, that inspired Napoleon Hill to write Think and Grow Rich. And Andrew Carnegie was one of the richest men on earth, like J. Paul Getty, or like today it would be Warren Buffett or Bill Gates or somebody. W. Clement Stone, who worked with Napoleon Hill, was the richest man in America for a while. And I knew him during that time. I went to his office with Og Mandino in Chicago, and I served on a committee with W. Clement Stone. And I wrote the manual to go with an audio series published by Mr. Stone. So, I've been in the presence of greatness many, many, many times, and not only heard these people or met these people, hung out with them. I went jogging with Zig Ziglar. I went to church with him and his wife. I did the fire walk with Tony Robbins when he was still a rosy-cheeked kid, back in the 1980s. Gad, it's just amazing. And here's an unbelievable experience I had. 1989, I was president of the National Speakers Association. Called Earl Nightingale. Mr. Nightingale, would you do the honor of joining me on stage at our convention in front of 2,000 or 3,000 of your peers in the field of personal development, and let me interview you about the evolution of this profession that we know as personal development. I said, it doesn't pay, but we'll make it as easy on you as we can. He said, I might. In other words, I'd like to do it, but I don't know if I can justify it when the time comes. So put me down as a tentative. Okay, I did. A few weeks later, his wife, Diana, called me. Jim, Earl died. He passed away. We've had a funeral for him, not a real one, but we cremated him and spread his ashes here at home in a private service. But I would like to have a memorial for him at your speakers convention because you're his people. I said, oh, we would be so honored. So in Dallas, Texas, at the Lowe's Anatole Hotel in 1989, we held a memorial service for Earl Nightingale. Earl's son, David, was one of the hundreds in the audience that day. And I was the only outside speaker. Now, pause for a second. I'm the fat clerk that heard him on the radio in Little Rock in 1972. No credentials, no history with Nightingale himself, simply came up through the ranks following his advice. We get all the way to the other end of the spectrum, and his widow calls me and invites me to speak at his memorial service. And I said, I'm not worthy. This should be heads of state and giants of industry. She said, Jim, you're wrong. She said, we're going to have a video message from Dennis Waitley. And then I'm going to tell the backstory on what it was like to be married to Earl Nightingale. And then I want you, as president of the National Speakers Association, to speak because you are the product of what he was teaching. And so I had that honor, that unbelievably huge honor, to be the only outside speaker at his memorial service. So how much impact can these ideas have in a person's life? It'll change your world.
Jim, I'm just lost in your story. I actually got goosebumps. because as I'm hearing this, and you talked about the interview part, I'm starting to think, I'm like, wow, I'm interviewing you and you did all that. And going back to the whole, the history, Napoleon Hill, all that stuff. And now we're going to be a co-author together.
That's right.
13 Steps to Riches, folks. This is the first edition with Dennis Waitley. This just came out. Sharon Lechter, 13 Steps to Riches. Okay. The third volume out of 13 steps, right? We're going to have one book for each. On Napoleon Hill's 13 Steps to Riches, in his Think and Grow Rich book, Jim Cathcart is going to write his part and be the celebrity author in there. And I'm hearing this, you guys are hearing this story, Think and Grow Rich, right? By Napoleon Hill. This whole process would have not happened if it wasn't for him, right? Or Andrew Carnegie.
Right.
Which would have unfolded Earl Nightingale, which unfolded Jim Cathcart. Here, Dr. Finance. Like, I'm here, like, I'm part of this train now. Like, absolutely. I feel so special, like, interviewing you. The more I don't know, I just got chills and I was thinking about that. So
thank you so much for that. Yeah, that volume is going to be on auto-suggestion, which is kind of like affirmations, the way you talk to yourself, the way you think about yourself, how you can plant an idea in your mind and cultivate it to transform your life. Because the reason I listened to so many hundreds of hours of Earl Nightingale recordings was because I had not been raised to think that way. And I knew I had to overexpose myself to a different way of thinking for an extended period of time, which ended up being 5 years, in order to reach the tipping point where I would be a different kind of person than I was destined to be by following my natural path only.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. I want to make time. We have a lot of questions. I wish we could spend more on this, but I just want to say, before we get to the next question, this is a testimonial, because forget about the doctor part and what my name is, Dr. Finance, what PhDs, accolades. I grew up just very similar to you, from a humble background. 4 grandparents died broke. And then my parents were just regular people from South Philadelphia. I grew up regular, and look, I'm here right now, just like you. Like this is a testimony to positive thinking and self-improvement. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. So thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. I was getting a little emotional there.
Well, hey, catch me up.
All right. So let's figure about a minute a question or less, and I think we should make time.
Okay.
Talk about your impact you had on great speakers like Les Brown and Brian Tracey, because I know they're very famous speakers in the world. They blew up millions and tens of millions. And you actually, in this train, actually came before them, and you witnessed them grow, like Tony Robbins, same thing.
Yeah, same thing with Tony. Because when I started as a full-time speaker, Tony Robbins was 12 years old. So, we're talking serious.
That's perspective.
Yeah. So one day in Tampa at a National Speakers Winter Convention, I was on the shuttle going from the hotel after the convention back to the airport with some other speakers. And I was seated, and there's this guy standing up, hanging onto one of those little loops on the shuttle bus, and he said, "You're Jim Cathcart, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, I try to be," and laughed. And he said, "Well, I'm Les Brown, and I'm going to be a famous motivational speaker." I said, "Really? Well, tell me about you." He said, "I'm going to my first paid speech." I said, "Get out of here. Seriously, you're going?" "Yeah." He said, I'm flying from Tampa to my first paid engagement as a professional speaker." And I said, "Wow, well, congratulations. And, be sure and apply all the ideas you got here, because it'll help shorten your path." Well, he not only went to that paid speech, he went on to fame and fortune and has made a profound impact in the world. And he was in Westlake Village, California about 3 years ago. And I signed up for his program and got in the audience. And I just sat there, didn't say anything. And he's up on stage being wonderful. And someone said, to one of the crew, they said, "Hey, get Mr. Brown a chair." And so I walked over and I said, "I'll help." And so I got this big old easy chair, and I walked up on stage with it, carrying this big thing, and walked up behind him and set the chair down. And he looked over and nodded to me, and then sat down in the chair and continued his speech. He hadn't noticed who I was. And then I went back out to the audience and I just sat out there and listened and learned. And then he said, "Are there any questions?" And I said, "I have a question." He said, "Yes." And I said, "Hi, Les. My name's Jim Cathcart." He said, "Jim, is that you?" He said, "Oh my God, folks, I was on a shuttle bus and I was, and he told the story. That was so cool. So cool. Brian Tracey was in Canada. He started his business up there doing a series of seminars on the science of personal achievement. What do you call it? The psychology of achievement, like Dennis Waitley's psychology of winning. And Dennis heard me speak at a national speakers convention in New Orleans many years ago, like 1980. And Brian said, "Could I come to California and meet with you?" Well, sure. And I lived in La Jolla, San Diego, was partners with Tony Alessandra. And so we met at George's restaurant overlooking La Jolla Cove in a beautiful picturesque setting. And Brian had brought Victor Risling, his lieutenant, with him. And they came from Canada and they sat there with Tony and me. And he said, "So what's it like doing business here and living here in California and all that?" And I answered his questions as best I could. And so did Tony. He said, "Well, I'm going to do it." And so he went back to Canada and closed up shop and moved to California, became ultimately a US citizen, and went on. At one point, he even ran for governor back when Schwarzenegger got elected. Brian Tracey was one of the gubernatorial candidates that year.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, one of God knows how many, like 40 candidates. Of course, Brian has gone on to just travel the world and get a following of millions of people. I remember he used to do audio albums only and not books. And Tony and I had written a few books. And I said, "Brian, you really ought to write some books." "Nah, Jim, I'm into audio." And of course, now Brian's written more books than I have, and has done an amazing job with that. And he's still inspiring people to this day. I mean, he's been through all kinds of challenges. He had throat cancer. He recovered from that. He's all kinds of things, but he's still out there contributing great ideas.
So you've had this amazing influence on all these major influencers. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
And the reverse is true. You know, when I'm in their audience, I learn from them. I mean, Brian came over to our house for parties, and I've been to his house, and we've spent lots of social time together, and so
Yeah, it's funny when the teacher becomes the student, the cycle just reverses. Yeah.
Or when the teacher and the student become peers. Like when I got to know Zig Ziglar, and we became no longer teacher and student, but equals. And when Og Mandino, my hero, who wrote the book, The Greatest Salesman in the World, and many others that sold tens of millions of copies, who was working at the time for W. Clement Stone, Og Mandino called me one day and said, "Jimmy, I need to ask you some questions. I need your advice." And I'm thinking, awesome. Wow. Wow. I mean, first off, that he had my phone number. Second, that he felt comfortable enough to call me Jimmy, which I don't even ask my friends to call me that. I'd rather they call me Jim. But anyway, wow. And I've been in his home, and I was with Og and Betty, his wife. And she said, "Jim, Og has your book in his desk." I said, "That's nice." She said, No. Og has your book in his desk. I said, "Thank you." She said, "Jim, don't you realize what I'm saying?" She said, Og Mandino, one of the greatest, most successful self-help authors in the history of the world, sold tens of millions of books. In his desk has about 3 books, one of which is the workbook you wrote for the W. Clement Stone audio program in 1976.
Wow.
And I said, "Wow."
Talk about full circle. Thank you, Jim. Much appreciated. All right. How much time does it take to become an expert in anything? 30 seconds.
30 seconds? Yeah, that'll work. 1 extra hour a day focused in one field, not a big, broad field, but a narrow one. 5 years from now, you'll know enough about that field and be good enough with it that you will be considered a serious player.
Now, I got to add to that, though, because there is the rumor that it's 10,000 hours. And I believe, I didn't read it, but the Outlier book from Malcolm Gladwell. Yeah. And also they say Thomas Edison, some people say 3,000 hours, some people say 10,000 hours. I think these numbers got mixed up somewhere, but I don't know.
Well, I don't think that's a scientific number.
Yeah,
I think it's a good guideline. And if you look at, my 400 free speeches and all those nights of driving to JC's meetings in the evening, sometimes 4 hours one way, and then sleeping in a roadside park on the way home in my car so I wouldn't die from a traffic accident, and speaking in fire stations while people are sitting on the running boards of fire trucks, speaking in living rooms, speaking in bars with noise over there, speaking in poor lighting, speaking in cold church basements or hot tents, where people have to get a paper plate and fan themselves to keep from heat stroke. Speaking where one guy showed up and we were expecting 20 or 50. Speaking where there are many, many, many people and they don't have a good sound system. When a guy came up to me in Philadelphia, in Towanda, Pennsylvania, and he said, "Do you really need a microphone tonight?" And this was like half an hour before the speech. And I said, "No." He said, "Phew," which means he didn't arrange for one. I said, "No, I don't need a microphone. I will hear everything."
That's funny.
And I let that sink in. And then he went, "Oh my gosh." He said, "They won't hear you?" I said, "Not very well. This microphone's not for me, it's for them." He said, "Well, can't you just project?" I said, "Yeah, but the first 5 minutes I'll wear my voice out and they won't be able to hear me. I'll be too hoarse." He said, "Oh my God, I've got to go get a microphone." I said, "Well, get a neck microphone, a lavalier." And because this was when they were all on a wire. And he said, "Okay." And he came back with this, a full-size radio microphone on a stand.
That's funny.
And it had I swear this is true, it had a shoestring tied to it so I could put it around my neck. I said, "Are you serious?" He said, "Well," and I said, "Just forget it." And I just held it in my hand.
That's funny.
So if you don't endure the pain, if you don't go through all the difficult times, you can't be good all the time. People say, "I'm a good speaker. I just need someone to book me." No, if you're a good enough speaker, you'll be able to book yourself. And if you can't book yourself, you should only do occasional speeches for others because you're not going to have a career as a speaker. You've got to book your speeches. Mm-hmm. And you got to be a good speaker when the room catches on fire. I've had that happen.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a second, actually.
You got to be a good speaker when the audience is ticked off at the guy who called the meeting. When the guy before you announced the death of the most beloved person in the company. You got to be a good speaker when the circumstances are horrible. Otherwise, you're not ready to get paid yet.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. All right. How does it feel to be a Hall of Fame professional speaker? Maybe 30 seconds.
I've been inducted into 2 halls of fame, the Sales and Marketing Hall of Fame in London for my work with the concept and the book Relationship Selling, and in the Professional Speakers Hall of Fame called the Council of Peers, a Council of Equals Award for Excellence, CPAE, Council of Peers Award for Excellence. And I received that award back in 1985 with Jim Rohn and Tony Alessandra, and Bill Woodruff was the other guy, and Dr. Lyman Style. Feels pretty good.
Feels good. Okay. Thank you. What are your best tips to make a good speaker great? If you could just summarize, maybe.
That's easy. That's easy. I was asked that often when I was in China on that lecture tour. "Mr. Cathcart, what is necessary for me to become great speaker?" And I would say, be a great person and agree to give speeches. And then they would look at me confused. And I would say, seriously, a great speaker is a great person who speaks pretty well, not a person who is not great, who gives great performances. That's an actor. So to be a great actor is one thing. To be a great speaker means you must first be a good person and develop the greatness within you so that you can share it with others and they are inspired to be better themselves, because the speech's purpose is not you, it's them. The speech doesn't matter. Your delivery doesn't matter. Your message doesn't matter. Your self, you don't matter. The meeting doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the value the audience can get from hearing what you have to share. So make sure what you have to share is not just you showing off, but rather it's you showing an example others can learn from.
That is awesome, Jim. Thank you. I definitely like the part about the actor. That really makes a lot of sense. So what are some of the wildest things, and you touched upon this before, that happened to you on stage as a speaker? Maybe you can give a quick summary.
Man, well, the monster truck is that's a biggie. Because I was in Louisville, Kentucky, in the rodeo arena, scheduled to give a speech to about 400 people. And they put a stage in the middle of the dirt out in the rodeo arena and put the people up in the bleachers. And they told me, we're going to bring you, Larry's going to bring you in. He's going to drive you into the arena. And Larry leads me off stage down one of those ramps where they bring in the bulls for the rodeo. And there's a monster truck, 2 stories, 3 stories tall. And he taught me how to climb the tire and catch the bottom of the step and pull myself up into the cab. And I'm wearing a suit and wingtip shoes, and a tie. And he cranks this thing up and flames shoot out of the exhaust. And we go roaring into the arena, and we're shooting a rooster tail of dirt up behind us because we're going, I don't know how fast, across the arena. And noise is just huge. And we get to the other end of the arena, and he does a sharp turn, and we go up on 2 wheels and then crash back down. And then he pulls up in front of the stage and stops and says, okay. And I said, okay, what? He said, well, jump. And the stage looks like a postage stamp. I feel like I'm landing a plane on an aircraft carrier, but the plane is me. And so I had to jump out of this thing down onto the stage, and thank God I didn't break any bones. Oof. And then I had to give a speech from that moment. And I guarantee you my speech wasn't nearly as exciting as the introduction. And I've had occasions where, well, there was the act before me was an elephant. They had a circus theme. Think big was their motto. And they brought in a full, honest to God elephant onto a floor covered with visqueen, and the elephant pooped in front of the audience.
What?
And then danced in it and splashed the people in the front rows. It was horrible. And then they said, wait just a minute. And they cleaned a little bit of it up, moved the visqueen out of the way, and said, okay, our speaker is Jim Cathcart. Are you serious? And I've just had so many weird occasions like that.
Jim, that would make an awesome movie, because a guy like you've seen everything. I heard Dennis Waitley talk one time about being a speaker. He was like the 2nd ranked person on Delta Airlines, and like that flies on Delta Airlines, something like that. And I mean, you guys like you've seen so much stuff that really is not documented. I mean, the crazy things that happen on stages, and it, just you're giving us a sample here, but you had deaths that happened, you had burning buildings. Right? Like just
people have seizures. I was in Kalamazoo, Michigan, speaking to a JC's convention ages ago, and about maybe 500 people in the room, big room. And this big lumberjack comes stumbling in, a guy with a beard and a Mackinaw and all that. And he's easily 6'4", and he comes stumbling in blind drunk. And he looks around the room, and I'm up on stage giving a speech. And he says, I can kick your ass. And so he's challenging people to a fight.
Oh, geez.
And he's yelling, and saying, come on, I'll take you. And so I look around, and it's obvious I'm in charge because I'm the only guy in the room with a microphone. And I'm 100 feet away from him easily. And I said, excuse me, sir, up here. And he looks across the room at me, and he says, what? And I said, were you talking to me? He said, I can take you, I can kick your butt, and I said, You probably can. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, I need 8, not 7, 8 of the largest men in this room to please stand. So if there's a large man at your table, encourage him to stand. And 8 guys stood up. There's 5. Okay, we need 3 more. Okay, 2.
That's funny.
Okay, we got 8. I said, would you 8 gentlemen please help this guy find the exit? And so these big guys all started converging on him, and he ran back out in the lobby, and they found a cop. It was a woman that was a police officer on duty there, and she put him in handcuffs and hauled him away.
That's just the power of the microphone. Like
Exactly.
It doesn't matter if you look like a toothpick. You actually control that room just by your voice. That's amazing.
And you're in charge whether you want to be in charge or not. You can't say, I'm the guest speaker, I'm sorry, somebody fix this. No. When the room caught on fire in Washington, D.C., I had the mic. So I had to evacuate 700 people.
So the person with the mic has the control. They're the ones that have the power,
yeah,
right?
By default. And you have to know where the exits lead, because a lot of times the exit sign leads to an internal hallway that goes around here, around there, and then finally out back there. And you could be leading people to their death if you send them to this exit sign, because it may be ultimately an exit, but it's not the exit. Mm-hmm. So you need to know before you get up to speak every time, you need to know, how can you get people out of the room if you have to? And you need to be the one here's what I tell people in writing before every speech. I tell them, if there's an emergency, I pledge to be the calmest person in the room. And I will help make it better. So if you have an emergency, look to me, because if I have the microphone, I will help make it better.
That is awesome. Thank you, Jim. I love that story. That's great.
Thank you.
I will share that story because I think that is just such a cool story. Okay. How important, speaking of telling stories, just real quickly, how important is it learning to story tell, to be anything really in life?
If you're going to be a speaker, you must be a storyteller. And you don't have to have your own stories, and you don't have to tell jokes, but you have to understand how to create a picture in the mind of a listener and draw from that a lesson that they can use or relate to. And stories are the way the mind is structured, the way it learns, the way it processes and retains information. I've had people come to me, and like San Francisco airport, a guy walked up to me and he said, "Grandma at McDonald's in Tulsa, Oklahoma." I said, "Oh my God." I said, "That was 1975. Where did you learn that story?" He said, "You spoke to our convention 6 years ago in Indianapolis or wherever it was, and you told that story, and I'll never forget it." Wow.
The power of storytelling.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. All right. I share the same sentiment with you when I was shocked to find out later in life that I also tell good stories. Coming from humble beginnings. See, my grandfather was a storyteller. He died broke. And I didn't even realize this till the past year when I started building my brand a lot more. And I got a storytelling coach and publicity training and all that stuff.
Good.
And they're like, the power of the storytelling. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, who tells stories? My grandfather told stories. He goes, no. That's how you build wealth. And then I started thinking about it. My poor grandfather who died broke, right? I inherited, I think, a watch from him. I loved him so much. But when I was a kid, he spent so much time in the backyard just telling me stories. He was actually giving me wealth. And when I heard that, like, me telling the story right now, it's like I'm honoring him.
Yeah.
No, it's
really are.
So anyway, coming from humble beginnings, why do you think that nobody told us of the importance of this skill set?
They did tell me. I grew up in Arkansas. I grew up in the South, and the South is a storytelling culture. And of course, so is the North. The humanity is a storytelling culture, because that's how culture is passed along. That's how family legacy is passed along, like you just illustrated. But in the South, it's celebrated. You know, you'd sit by a Cracker Barrel in a rocking chair and smoke a corncob pipe and say, oh, back in my day, you know, we didn't have no wagons and horses. We had to walk everywhere, you know, and you learn to make up stories. You learn to tell stories. You learn to savor the stories being told by your aunts and uncles and grandparents. And, you know, I remember in Louisiana, back in the country, my great aunt Lizzie lived on an old dirt road outside Winfield, Louisiana, and that's where Mom had grown up. And we would go down there and we'd spend a week at a time. And in the wintertime, the grown-ups would sit around a big old pot-bellied stove, wood-burning stove, in the living room in these chairs that they had made locally that had cowhide seats, still had the hair on the cowhide. And us kids were required to sit around and be quiet and listen while all the grown-ups told stories. And it wasn't that Aunt Tud that did such and such? No, it weren't her. It was Uncle Luther and Aunt Nettie. Yeah. And, you know, they lived over in Ellick before they moved here to Winfield. And all this stuff, you know, you're getting all the color and all this. And of course, most of it means nothing at first. But then you start making those connections and it starts coming to life for you. And you've got the natural, you've had the natural teaching to continue that yourself. I called in one time for my high school class reunion, 30th class reunion. I was in some state giving a speech, couldn't go physically, so I called. And they said, hey, here's the phone number for the payphone down by the reunion. Call that and talk to our classmates. Hey guys, Cathcart's calling. So someone picked up the phone and we talked for a minute and I said, go get some other folks and send them over. And so people were coming by the phone, picking it up and talking. And one of them said, so what do you do now? I said, I'm a professional speaker and author. And the response was, well, you always were a good storyteller. I said, I was? Well, yeah, don't you remember? Da, 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 da? And I did, but I'd never thought of myself as a storyteller. So that it matters.
So yeah, you kind of had a similar epiphany. You're like,
yeah,
oh, cool. I already
had
that.
Telling you that was a story.
Yeah, it's exactly. Yeah. you automatically checked off the box that you didn't even know you needed. And wow, I already got that skill. Okay, cool.
But I study storytelling, and I've had storytelling coaches. I still go to speech coaches whenever I get an opportunity. 1 year I spent $10,000 on speech coaches.
Wow.
Another year I spent $10,000 or $15,000 on a business coach to help me and my small team, my staff, be more strategic about everything we were doing. You know, so I've hired a lot. And last year, 2020, I spent $4,500 just for an online coaching course with a colleague. And here I am, 75 years old.
Sorry,
right?
Why do you need it though? That kind of.
Because there's no way I have mastered it all. There's no way I know all the things that could help me make more of a difference, have better payoffs, and expend less grief in getting it done. I want to learn from everybody I can, like from you.
I appreciate you being very humble about that and admitting that, because I that actually shocked me. You have the same mentality as me. Me, like Dr. Finance, cool, but I might know a lot about finance, but I think a teacher should always be a student, and that button should always be on. And when you think you're great, that's when you need to step back for a minute, because that can't happen.
If your teacher has stopped being a student, your teacher needs to stop being your teacher.
I like that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Lifelong learning. Cavett Robert, founder of the National Speakers Association, he said, school is never out for the pro. And at age 87, I saw him standing in front of our group, Speakers Roundtable, the mastermind group, and delivering stories and getting coached by Ron Arden, who was a speech coach that we had hired for the day.
Wow.
87 years old.
That is awesome.
Way past the need for anything like that. He was still eager to learn.
He was demonstrating by example.
Fact.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. And why do you like to sing?
I don't know, but I can't imagine a life without being able to do that. I mean, last night I was doing a mastermind parlor discussion at a colleague's house on Lake Austin. And at the end of the evening, we were talking about the importance of how we imprint our kids and the importance of making time, not just to tell them things, but to lead through example. And there was a guitar nearby.
Oh, he's going to do it.
And I picked up the guitar. It was not my guitar, but I picked up the guitar and I said, why don't we conclude with a song? And he said, the host said, okay, Jim, what do you got? A child arrived just the other day, came to the world in the usual way, but there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away. He was talking before I knew it. As he grew, he said, I'm gonna be like you, Dad. You know I'm gonna be like you. Cats in the Cradle by Harry Chapin.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you, Jim.
Singing is fun.
All right, if you could do it all over again, how would the person you'd like to be do the things you'd like to do?
That's what I call the daily question. I've got it on a mouse pad. How would the person I'd like to be, the better me, the more advanced, the more mature, the more emotionally intelligent me, how would that person do the things I'm about to do? That's a question we should all be asking. You know, just look at what's the better part of me? How would that person do these things I'm doing? This is from March 26, 1998. It's my notes from a Stephen Covey seminar that I went to. And one of the exercises was write a tribute statement that someone would give you in each of your life roles. Now, what's a tribute statement? It means if someone else was talking about you, what would you want them to say? Ideally, in a perfect world, what would you want them to say? For each of your roles in life, what would your wife or husband say about you as a spouse? What would your child say about you as a parent? What would your employer or the business owner say about you as a coworker, and so forth? So I wrote it out for each one of those. And for example, this is not necessarily what was said. This is in my dream of dreams, what I want to be worthy of. Husband, Jim always makes me feel loved and lovable. I admire his character and his wisdom. His intelligence amazes me. He makes me laugh. Nobody's ever been as open and transparent as him. This is how he teaches too, and he makes me a better person. That's what I want to be worthy of, related to my wife. Father, Dad truly, deeply loves me. He'd give his life for me. His own life is an inspiration to me that I can do and be as well. He's shown me that I am capable, worthy, and special. So I went on in every one of the roles in my life and articulated what I would, in my highest and noblest dreams, want others to say. And I've used that as a guide to what do I do day by day? What are the little steps and things that I should be doing? The little item I should put on my bathroom mirror, you know, and work on until I mastered it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jim. All right, Jim, we're almost there with a series of small little questions and we'll wrap it up. Can one book change the world? Maybe 30 seconds.
No, but one person can change the world. I love what Margaret Mead once said. She was a sociologist and a student of what causes society to behave as it does. cultural anthropologist. Margaret Mead said, "What makes me think that a small group of highly committed people can change the world? Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And if you think about that, I mean, go back to the biblical days. Jesus had 13 people and one of those turned out bad, right? It's 12, a small group of committed people created Christianity as we know it. What? Right? I mean, a small group of founding fathers created America. And these are people that were highly committed and had very different interests, and there was combat between them over these ideas, and they fought it out, but stayed the course and changed the world. Wow. I was in China last year before last, and my agent said, when you think about China, what comes to mind? I said, culture, history, tradition. I said, what do you think about when you hear America? He said, freedom. And there was no pause. I said, when you think of America, what word comes up? Freedom. It was that fast, like he was interrupting. I said, wow. He said that we don't have that here. Wow. That's what everybody on earth wants, because that's just the life impulse wanting to be expressed. And what inhibits it is government and controls from outside. But the life impulse is trying to express itself through us, through every single cell being, through every animal, every plant. It's, life is trying to grow. Even a virus is life looking to grow.
Thank you, Jim. That's one of the best responses. I really like that part about the quote, especially. What role has networking played in your life? Maybe 30 seconds.
No one of us is as good or as strong or as smart as all of us. So if all you know is what you know, sucks to be you. When you listen to someone else, when you become intelligently curious and learn how to ask questions and shut up and listen, then you not only know what you know what they know. But until that point, all you know is your point of view, your knowledge, your experience, your feelings. And that's why we've got to stay open to new information all the time and assume we could be wrong. Even when we feel just set in our convictions, we could be wrong. And if we don't understand that we could be wrong, we're dead wrong. Because the more committed you are to, I am right and nobody else is, unless they agree with me, the more likely you're wrong.
Thank you, Jim. And as far as an extension of that, is mentoring important? And who were some of your mentors? Obviously, you already mentioned Nightingale.
I've had many mentors. Joe Willard, my first big client with Mass Mutual. He is a mentor of mine and a dear friend to this day. Nito Kubain, who's 2 years younger than me, but way more successful, is a mentor and a dear friend. Tony Alessandra is a mentor and a dear friend. And I've just got a herd of mentors out there, and networking is the only way that we can really learn and grow. So we've got to be reaching out and listening and being humble enough to take guidance, even if you feel like you're the guy or gal at the top of their game.
Thank you, Jim. And we're pivoting into finance mini questions. Okay, what are your favorite financial books? Maybe you can name some.
Greatest Salesman in the World, which is built around George Clayson's book, The Richest Man in Babylon, the pay yourself first concept.
Right.
That's got to be head and shoulders best ever, because it talks about you and money and what money means and what wealth means. People ask me, what is money? I say, money is a permission tool. You can't come in unless you buy a ticket. Money is the tool that got you permission to go in. You can't live there unless you buy the house. Money gave you that permission. Money is a tool that gets you permission. Money is not a goal. Money is a means to a goal. So it can be your target. It can be your interim step, But the purpose of money is to remove inhibitions, to remove limits to what you're capable of doing. And if you're able to endow a college on your own without money, then money's unimportant. It's the endowment of the college, that allowing them to build it and staff it and operate it. That's the thing that matters. So if you see money in that respect, then you recognize that the money's not the thing. What money will do is the thing. The biblical passage, and I've referred to the Bible a lot in here. I'm Christian, but I'm not saying everybody has to be. I'm just saying I think there's more wisdom there than anywhere I've ever seen. The Bible passage says the love of money is the root of all evil. Money's not the root of anything. It's just stuff. But the love of money over the love of people or the love of goodness, that's the problem, right? Mm-hmm. And other financial books, I'm not a avid student of financial books, so I couldn't reel off many. But you go to fundamental principles, I'm your guy.
That makes a lot of sense, Jim. And speaking of money, do we need money to survive? Now listen, no, you're laughing because it's common sense to us, but common sense is not common practice.
Well, I know. Yeah,
so
it's like people say, "Well, I don't, money's not important to me. I don't need to make money. I just want to help people." Well, how many people are you going to help with no money?
Right.
And if you can't take care of your needs, how are you going to be able to take care of other needs? Because you can't lift someone to a level you're not on yet. You can push them up there, but you're still down here. And so how important is money? Try living without it. And then try living with it. Yeah, but I'm not greedy. Greed has to do with the exclusion of others. Greed is saying, I want this, but I don't want you to have it. That's greed. Ambition is, I want this because look at what I can do with it. I want more people to be Andrew Carnegie and to endow a university. I want more people to be as wealthy as Bill Gates and be able to create a foundation that has an impact on the whole world. I want people to be like Nito Cobain and to endow a $170 million arena conference center and hotel that at its grand opening on Saturday was paid for.
Wow. So that's a hard yes. We do need money to survive. Okay. Thank you.
At least we need what it'll do.
Yes.
Food, clothing. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jim. How about finance? Is finance necessary for everyone? Finance, the science of finance.
Yeah. If you're not smart with money, if you like this woman that was given a tour I was on the other day, she said, I hate math. I'm not good at math. I said to her at the end of the tour, if you keep telling yourself that, it will become more and more true in your life. So you need to get it that math is merely a language. And if you can't speak that language, you don't get to travel in that country. And if you don't become good at math, you won't become good at money, and you'll be living a smaller life than you could have lived. So get good at finances. Learn to budget, learn to plan, learn to set goals, learn to track, learn percentages and margins, learn everything you can about money. I once wrote a book. I co-authored it with the American Bankers Association for the USJCs to publish it for their 300,000 members. And it was called Personal Financial Planning. And it was just on the fundamentals of money. And my son, when he was a teenager, came to me and said, Dad, I want my own money. He said, my friends are getting an allowance and I want an allowance. I said, I'll do that, but I'm not going to just give you entitlement. If you're going to have your own money, you're going to have to learn to manage money. And so he and I spent between 3 and 5 years going through a process that started with simply requiring him to keep a record of every penny he received or found, even on the ground, or got from grandma as a gift, and every penny he spent, no matter what it was on, like for a soda or something, every penny that he received and every penny he spent, he had to write it in a little notebook every single day. And if he didn't do that, he didn't get his next allowance.
Wow.
And if he skipped a day and made up a lie, to fill in, then his allowance was suspended for a month. So he quickly learned, keep the records and make it a daily habit. And so he learned where money came from and where money went to in his life. And then the second year, we sat down and set goals. What do you need money for? And he listed all the things you'd expect a kid to want money for. I said, no, you need to get more serious. Why is money necessary for you to be alive? What do you mean? Well, where's your food come from? Well, you guys. Okay. But when you're not home, where do you get food? Well, from the school. What if it's not school? Well, I could buy a sandwich with what? Oh. And so we write down the food that he's going to need to be able to buy during the year that's not at home or at school or a friend's house. And then the clothing that he needed to get through the year. And then the school supplies that he needed to get through the year. And the fees to go to the football games or to a movie with friends or whatever. And we came up with a list of every possible reason he would need money to remain active in the world for the coming year. And then we put it into a calendar of which months he needed which ones, because you don't need school supplies during the summer. You don't need winter clothing during the summer, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So we did all that so he would learn to think chronologically in terms of budgeting for a year and think financially in terms of what he required to function in life. And then we wrote it all down. And he said, well, where do I get this money? I said, Mom and I will give you this much. And it was a monthly stipend that we would give him. And I said, if you exceed that, like you want to buy something else, get a job. Well, how am I going to get a job, Dad? I'm 14 years old. I don't know. Figure it out. What can a 14-year-old do that's worth paying for? Help a neighbor clean their garage, mow somebody's lawn, go run errands, pick up trash. You figure it out. It's your problem. I'm not going to solve it for you. I'm already funding your existence. And he said, okay. And the process continued, but now he's not keeping a record of what money coming in and going out. He's keeping a record of it by category. How much on clothing and hard items that he keeps, and how much on experiences like football games and movies that are gone the minute it's, or an ice cream cone that's gone. So he learns tangible and intangible in year 2. And then year 3, we get even more sophisticated. And what was interesting was the amount we gave him each month didn't increase. For 5 years, the amount we gave him each month didn't increase. And by the 5th year, he and I would sit down over a few days, taking this in bites and pieces. We would work out an entire year's budget requirement for him. And then we would break it into parts as to when it was needed. And then I would commit to a certain amount, which was somewhere under $200 a month, but it included so many things that his friends never had to think about because his parents always paid for that. So all his friends were getting was just entitlement spending money. What Jimmy was getting was an education in finance. And so I took him through this laborious process, which was hellacious work for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't popular. He didn't want to do it. And I didn't need an extra job doing that, but I knew how valuable it was in his life for him to become financially literate. And so we did this, and I required him to save 10% off the top of the money that he needed, not of excess money, of the money that he needed. And if he went and did a job and earned some money, he had to save 10% of that. So it was mandatory savings that he couldn't touch. I told him there's 2 reasons to have savings: savings for goals like get a bicycle, get a car, get a, and savings for security, be wealthy someday. So when he, 5 years later, graduated high school and went to college, he had $3,000 in savings.
Wow.
$3,000 on a monthly budget of about 198 or something like that. And he had records of his financial experience for the previous 5 years.
That is an awesome story, and actually a very cool. You can model that for kids. I mean,
oh yeah, you could create a course for it and
yeah,
do videos and the whole thing. You might want to consider that.
Yeah,
Dr. Finance, that's a perfect product for Dr. Finance to create. And if you want to co-author it with Jim Cathcart, let's talk.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I like that. I really do. And Jim, by the way, the concept that what you talked about, I actually have a concept for it in my last book, The Survival of the Richest. I call it survival by a third party. So in the case of your son, you were trying to explain to him, yeah, daddy pays for it, right? Like that's a third party. But when you take that third party away, whether it's the government for welfare or the prison to pay for the prisoner's food, right? Or your parents, right? You need to survive on your own. And how do you do that? Through money, right? So thank you, Jim.
And if you can't, then you're a dependent.
Then you're a dependent. Exactly. All right, three last questions left, maybe 30 seconds, and we'll wrap it up. How important is having a purpose in business, and what is your purpose? This is perfect for you.
Purpose is your why. My why is what I stated earlier, my passion and purpose statement. My purpose in life is to help people live more fully and abundantly. So it's like that biblical passage, I've come that they would have life and have it more abundantly, John 10:10. That's the way I see my own purpose, is to help people live more fully, more abundantly, more joyfully, have more meaning in their life. And so all of my teaching, all of my writings, everything has been done with that focus in mind. I figure if I'm successful, they're better.
And it's important to have a purpose, Jim. Is that correct?
Oh, if you don't have purpose, then you quickly die, because purpose is the life source. Yeah. If you think about that, my dad retired at 62, took early retirement from the phone company, but he retired from the phone company, didn't retire to a new activity. At age 80, he died. From 62 to 80, he deteriorated physically. And his spirit wasn't what it used to be either, because he didn't retire to a new purpose. He went hunting and fishing and, hanging out with friends and raising a vegetable garden and built a deer camp, with some buddies, and all that was good, but it didn't challenge him. It's a purpose is always bigger than you. If you are setting a goal and you already know how to get it, that's not a goal, that's a to-do. A goal should be bigger than you know how to achieve it, so that you have to grow and search and learn in order to get there. That gives you a sense of purpose. Like Simon Sinek says, start with why. They say the person who knows how to do something will have a job, but the one who knows why will always be their boss. Well, make sure you know why you're doing everything you're doing. And when you're working with a client in a service profession like mine, where I'm going in to do teaching or training or motivation or whatever, the first thing I do is trying to figure out, why do they exist? Why should they want to do the things that I'm recommending? And how can I make that easier for them?
Hearing your story of your dad, and remember, I was a financial planner before I became a professor. So I helped a lot of people.
I was a banker, by the way.
Well, okay, I thought so. You have an interesting background in finance. Yeah. So I was curious, like, about living long. What happened with your dad? I saw that happen to a lot of the people that were my clients for retirement. They were retirement planning, but they were dying when they retired. Yeah. So I noticed this trend right out of college. I was retirement specialist for the largest investment company in the world, Vanguard. And, I noticed this. I'm like, well, I'm helping these people, but they're dying. So would you say that's an important key to living long? If you really want to live long, get yourself a purpose right now.
You bet. And constantly bite off more than you can chew. Always have something bigger than you that's your reason. It's like someone said that George Burns, the famous comedian, Mr. Burns, you say you're going to live to be 100. How do you know? He said, I have to. I'm booked. And he did. He actually lived to 100 years, which is astounding. But the key to longevity, and this has been studied by David Murdoch and the California Health and Longevity Institute, and a number of others like that, and Ken Dykewald and his company, AgeWave. They've done a great deal of study into this as well. So there's a lot of people studying longevity. Even the North Carolina Research Campus in Kannapolis outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, is all dedicated to studying what keeps people alive longer. Well, you can study it at the cellular level, like they're doing in North Carolina, or you can study it at the psychological or spirit level, which has to do with your sense of purpose. Cellular level, it's about nutrition, lifestyle, surroundings, circumstances, nutrients, all that kind of stuff. The psychological or spiritual side of it has to do with having a purpose. There are people that had smoked all their life and lived to be 106. There are people that ate seemingly unhealthy diets and lived way past 100. There are people in my profession, the profession of speaking and training and motivation, human behavior. Many of the veteran speakers, the founders of our Speakers Association, lived well into their 90s and continue to live well into their 90s when circumstances or physical genetics would not have indicated that was likely. I mean, here I am 75, I behave like I'm 45. You know, I'm playing rock and roll in clubs. I'm riding my motorcycle on twisty roads. I'm exercising, doing 100 push-ups a day, and love running mountain trails and things like that. And I'm constantly learning. And this afternoon, I'm going to be attending a workshop, a Zoom workshop. And then later today, you know, I've got more consulting and such going on. And someone said, when are you going to retire? And I said, well, you can come to the party. They may call it a funeral. It's going to be my retirement party, because as long as my mind and my body will function well enough to allow me to do some good, I've got work to do.
Jim, you're a great guy, man. I'm really honored to meet you. I mean, just the wisdom that comes out is just awesome. All right, we got two last questions left, Jim. And what would you know
how many last questions you've asked me so far? I'm figuring it's about 35.
All right, I know those were follow-up questions because your answers were so great. I had to.
Got it.
All right. What would you like to accomplish in the next 10 years or so, and why?
I figure I've got 10 years in ideal circumstances. I got about 10 years of prime time left in me. And then beyond that, you know, I can still do plenty of good and live a meaningful life. But I figure my prime time years probably is about a decade, right? From 75 to 85. And so most of the home runs I'm going to hit, I expect that I'll hit them during that time frame. And I have 3 books in the pipeline right now being written. I expect to rewrite a number of my books that were published 20, 30 years ago and update them and focus them on today's world more, and probably do that in collaboration with co-authors and such, single co-authors, as opposed to anthologies with many authors. And I'll do some of those as well. But I also want to continue to do what I'm focused on with a couple of colleagues now, and that is create mastermind consortia where we are gathering together on a semi-regular basis and exploring how to live more fully, more effectively, and make more of a meaningful difference in the world in our niche. And so I've got a number of people I'm guiding in that way. And I'm always looking for, you know, new candidates for that. And I can only take a few for that much personal attention each year, but I interview people, and when it's right for them, it's also right for me, then that turns into some pretty magical stuff.
And for money, of course, the mastermind.
Yeah, they pay to do that. But what I do is I move them up the food chain one quantum leap within the time that we're together, which is usually a few months to maybe a year. And I had one guy the other day, we were doing one of our sessions, and he said, right now I'm ready to sign up for 3 years. I said, whoa,
3
hold
years.
on, Sparky. Don't spend your money yet. I'd love to take it, but let's just do this first.
That's funny. I like that. All right, Jim, thank you so much. By the way, with the mastermind thing, I'm actually working on that. So maybe we can chat another time about that. If I can be of any help to you,
Cool.
I offer my service. So
I love it. Thank you.
you're welcome. What would you like to be your legacy to this world? Last question, and very important one.
Remember, I was telling you how I wrote out those ideal scenarios, husband, father, employer, partner, etc.
Yep.
Here's what I wrote for speaker, author, and human being. I love to hear Jim speak and tell stories. This is what I want people to think or feel, right? We are better people and better producers because of his speeches. He changes us towards our best and brings simple, powerful ways to do the important things. Life and business make more sense and seem more doable because of Jim. And then as an author, I want my readers to say, now I know how to make things better and make myself better and live more abundantly. I'm a better, nicer person because of Jim's messages. And then for human being, I wrote, I've stayed fit and healthy. I've grown through all my life. I've made enhancements to the world. I admire myself, and others are better off because I lived. That's
Wow.
my purpose statement. And I'm not living up to that yet, but I'm trying to day after day.
And in Clubhouse terms, are you complete?
I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate you being here, Jim. And I want to close out. And before I do, I want to turn the floor over to you. You're more than welcome to say anything that you want, show products or services or you show your books again or whatnot. So I'll leave the floor to you before we close.
Thank you. Well, I would just encourage those that if you're at a point in your life where you've achieved a pretty good amount of success, but there's a quantum leap ahead of you that you could take, and you feel like I resonate with you, what I was talking about, if that's compatible with the way you think and feel and believe, then reach out to me, send me an email, info at cathcart.com, and just say, I'd like to look at having a mentor relationship with you. And I'll chat with you and we'll determine whether that's the right fit for you. And if I am the right fit for you, I'll say so. If I'm not, I'll also say so. Because the last thing I want to do is get into a relationship like that with someone for whom I'm not the right guy. Maybe I'm making money at it, but that's not the point. The point is for you to say, dang, that was a good idea. I am so glad I did this. Because if that happens, then other people come to me automatically. You do your job well enough, second customer is many times easier than that first one was. And so I'm just looking to help people grow, people who are serious about being a good person and making the world a better place. And they're just looking for some guidance and some encouragement to get them along that path more rapidly.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. All right, Jim, we're going to close out now. If you can just hang in for just a second afterwards, and I'll speak to you after. I just want to say thank you again, Jim, for being here. What an honor to have you here. And on Clubhouse, you're such a tremendous guy. So, folks, thank you again. This is Dr. Anthony, Criniti IV, also known as Dr. Finance. You're on the Dr. Finance Live podcast with Jim Cathcart. And Jim already gave you the information where you can find them at. If you want to get my information, it's on the window here, drfinance.info. Don't forget to subscribe to the free newsletter. My books, if you're going to read them in order, The Necessity of Finance. I wrote that for my students about 10 years ago. And then moving down, The Most Important Lessons in Economics and Finance was also a very popular book. And if you really want to get deep, you go to Survival of the Richest, a book about this thick. Talk about deep thought. That's a lot for you. So 3 books. And then we got the co-hosting book with Jim Cathcart. Definitely check this out, folks. This is number 1, the 13 Steps to Riches, volume 2. Jim Cathcart is going to be volume 3. It's coming out within the next 2 months. So look forward to that. And thanks again. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to Jim and myself. And this podcast is going out to every podcast everywhere. where it's available, and YouTube. So a mouthful. Jim, you want last thoughts? Good.
Last thought, ask yourself every day, how would the person I'd like to be do the things I'm about to do?
Yes, I like it. All right, folks. So thanks again. Thanks again, Jim. I appreciate it. We'll see you on the next episode, folks. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.